a wrecked hypercar, a blacklisted VIN, and a billionaire CEO who couldn't stay quiet. This is the story of how one YouTuber's garage rebuild turned into one of the biggest controversies the supercar world has seen in years, and forced Bugatti to answer questions it never expected to face in public. It started with a stunt gone wrong. Alex Gonzalez, a content creator based in Miami known online as Fexaxkit, was behind the wheel of his Bugatti Chiron Pur Sport, one of only 60 ever built, a car that knew would run you somewhere north of $4 million. The Pur Sport isn't just a Chiron with a badge change. It's the track-focused version, stripped of weight, tuned for agility, built to be the sharpest, most aggressive version of an already absurd machine. Then, in an instant, all of that engineering met a wall, or in this case, the kind of low-speed mishap that would barely dent an ordinary car. For a Chiron, it was catastrophic. The front end crumpled. The airbags deployed. What should have been a fender bender left the car looking, mechanically, like a totaled vehicle. The insurance company agreed. Gonzalez was paid out, and the car was sent to a salvage auction, where it sat waiting for someone crazy enough to take it on. That someone turned out to be Gonzalez himself. He bought the car back from Cop Art for roughly $1.9 million after fees, still a steep discount off the original sticker price, but a huge amount of money for what was now, on paper, scrap. He wasn't done with it. He wanted it back on the road. And to make that happen, he called in Mat Armstrong. If you've spent any time in the corner of YouTube dedicated to wrecked supercars, you already know the name. Mat Armstrong is a British content creator who built an audience in the millions by doing something most people assumed was impossible: buying totaled hypercars and bringing them back from the dead in his own workshop. Ferraris, Lamborghinis, a Bugatti Veyron. He's taken on projects that manufacturers themselves said couldn't be done outside a factory. So when Gonzalez needed someone to look at his crushed Pur Sport, Armstrong was the obvious call. He'd built his entire channel on exactly this kind of challenge. But even by his standards, this was different. This wasn't just an expensive car. It was one of the rarest machines on the planet, built by a manufacturer notorious for controlling every single aspect of how its cars are serviced, repaired, and even discussed. Armstrong took the job anyway. Here's where the story stopped being just another rebuild video and became something bigger. When Armstrong and Gonzalez tried to source the parts needed to bring the Chiron back to life, they hit a wall that had nothing to do with engineering. Bugatti had locked the car's VIN in its system. No authorized dealer anywhere in the world would sell so much as a headlight for that specific chassis. The car had effectively been erased from Bugatti's official universe. The factory's alternative was blunt: ship the car to Molsheim, France, and let Bugatti handle the entire repair, their way, at their price. That price, according to the quotes Gonzalez received, was somewhere around $1.7 million, not far off what he just paid for the wrecked car itself. For Gonzalez, that number didn't make sense. He'd already been paid out once by insurance for a car Bugatti now wanted to essentially rebuild from a blank sheet at a cost that would make the whole endeavor pointless. So he turned that number down, and the blacklist stayed in place. Frustrated, Gonzalez did what any modern owner in his position might do. He went to social media and pushed back publicly, at one point suggesting that if Bugatti wouldn't budge, he and Armstrong would simply manufacture the parts themselves using 3D printing. It was a direct shot at a company whose entire brand identity rests on the idea that nothing about a Bugatti can be replicated outside its own walls. Meanwhile, Armstrong began documenting the teardown for his channel, and the videos didn't behave like typical YouTube content. They exploded. Millions of views piled up within days. Viewers who had never thought twice about hypercar repair economics were suddenly glued to a story about ownership, access, and whether a $4 million machine really required the level of secrecy Bugatti had built around it. It was around this point that something happened which caught almost everyone off guard. Bugatti's own CEO started paying attention. Mat Armstrong isn't a typical hypercar executive. He didn't inherit a legacy brand. He built his own electric hypercar company, Rimac Automobili, from scratch as a young engineer, before the Volkswagen Group's Porsche Bugatti division eventually merged with it and put him in charge of Bugatti itself. He has a reputation as someone who stays online, watches what's being said about his company, and isn't afraid to respond directly rather than hand the situation to a legal team. That's exactly what happened here. Rimac posted a video addressing the controversy head-on. He didn't try to shut the conversation down. Instead, he pushed back on what he described as years of exaggerated stories about Bugatti's service and parts pricing, the kind of five-figure oil change rumors that circulate endlessly online, arguing that the real numbers, while still expensive, weren't nearly as absurd as internet legend suggested. But he didn't stop at defending the pricing. Rimac also laid out, in detail, why he believed an independent rebuild of this specific car carried real risk. According to his account, the crash had done more damage than was visible from the outside: a shattered gearbox housing and structural damage to the car's carbon fiber monocoque, the tub that forms the literal skeleton of the vehicle and is central to protecting the driver in a serious impact. He argued that fixing damage at that level properly required splitting the chassis in half, something he said only 2 facilities in the world were equipped to do, and that shortcuts on a car capable of speeds well past 260 miles per hour weren't a place to take chances. It's worth saying plainly, on the safety argument, Rimac has a legitimate point, and it's one shared by plenty of people outside Bugatti's PR department. A vehicle built to those extremes doesn't behave like an ordinary sports car when something is even slightly off. Structural elements that are designed to fail in very specific, controlled ways during a crash exist precisely because getting it wrong can be fatal. That's not corporate spin, it's basic physics. What made this saga different from a typical corporate shutdown was what happened next. Rather than simply reiterating the blacklist and walking away, Rimac indicated he was willing to support the project. Bugatti's tone softened. Reduced repair estimates followed. And, notably, the outright parts freeze that had defined the early months of the standoff was eased. That doesn't mean the two sides suddenly agreed on everything. Far from it. Armstrong made clear in follow-up videos that he had no intention of shipping the car to France or handing the project over to the factory. He wanted to finish what he started, in his own workshop, using whatever combination of factory parts, third-party components, and hard-won knowledge he could put together. He admitted, candidly, that he was genuinely startled the CEO of one of the world's most exclusive car brands was not only watching his content but responding to it directly, something almost unheard of in an industry built around distance, legal teams, and carefully worded statements. As the teardown continued, Armstrong started noticing something that added an entirely new layer to the story. Bugatti operates under the umbrella of the Volkswagen Group, the same corporate family that owns Audi, Porsche, and yes, Volkswagen itself. And once Armstrong started digging into individual components, he found that some of them weren't unique to Bugatti at all. The clearest example involved the airbags. Armstrong pointed out that some of the Chiron's airbag units carried part numbers matching those found in an Audi A3, a car that, new, costs a small fraction of a single Bugatti wheel. Rimac didn't deny the overlap, but he pushed back hard on the implication that this made the parts simply interchangeable. His argument was that even components sharing a part number can behave differently depending on how they are integrated, tested, and calibrated within a specific vehicle, and that swapping components into a car of this complexity without factory-level validation could be misleading people into thinking something is safer than it actually is. As an example, he described how Bugatti discovered during cold weather testing of its newer Tourbillon model that certain interior leather could stiffen at extremely low temperatures to the point that it interfered with proper airbag deployment, the kind of failure mode that's nearly impossible to anticipate without extensive, expensive testing most independent shops simply can't replicate. It's a fair technical point, but it also didn't change the optics. For an audience that had spent years hearing that Bugatti parts were essentially irreplaceable works of art, seeing an airbag part number match a mainstream Audi hatchback landed hard. It reframed a question a lot of supercar owners had quietly been asking for years: how much of that price tag is engineering, and how much of it is exclusivity itself? The technical centerpiece of Armstrong's rebuild turned out to be exactly the challenge Rimac had warned about: splitting the Chiron's chassis to access the damaged transmission and gearbox mounts. Bugatti's official position was that this kind of separation required specialized equipment available at only 2 locations on the planet. Armstrong set out to prove that wrong, and, according to his own documentation of the process, he largely succeeded, working through the modular bolted construction of the car with a mix of patience, research, and improvised tooling that included, memorably, an ordinary trash can used to help support and maneuver sections of the car during the split. Once separated, the true extent of the damage became clear. What had first looked like a hairline crack in a mounting bracket turned out to be two significant tears. The collision had also pushed the engine and drivetrain forward just enough to crush coolant lines and damage surrounding components that weren't obvious from a surface inspection. Rather than treating each discovery as a dead end, Armstrong adapted. When a damaged coolant line had no factory replacement available, his team fabricated a fix using a length of reinforced brake hose. When a sensor needed replacing deep in the engine bay, he modified the surrounding housing to create better access for future repairs rather than tearing the whole assembly down again. None of it was factory spec. All of it worked. There were setbacks, too. Moments where a single mistake threatened to unravel months of progress and force the team back to the drawing board on a repair they thought was already finished. That's the reality of this kind of project. For every viral win, there are hours of frustrating, unglamorous problem-solving that never make it into a highlight reel. As the rebuild progressed and the view counts climbed into the millions, the story stopped being just about one car. It became a proxy war for a much bigger argument that's been building across multiple industries for years: the right-to-repair movement. On one side sit manufacturers like Bugatti, who argue that machines built to extreme performance limits, cars that can exceed 260 miles per hour on a public road, genuinely require factory-level oversight to be repaired safely. There's real substance to that position. A hypercar isn't a lawnmower. The margin for error shrinks dramatically as speed, power, and structural complexity increase, and a poorly executed repair on a car like this doesn't just risk an inconvenience, it risks a life. On the other side sit critics, including a large chunk of Armstrong's audience, who argue that exclusivity and safety have become conveniently intertwined. When only the factory can perform repairs, and the factory sets both the price and the terms, owners have effectively no leverage and no competition to keep costs in check. From that angle, a system built around safety concerns can also function as a system built around profit margins, whether or not that's the primary intention. Both things can be true at once, and that tension is exactly what made this story resonate so far beyond typical car enthusiast circles. It touched a nerve that already existed around modern ownership more broadly. The growing sense that buying something outright doesn't always mean fully controlling it, whether that's a tractor, a smartphone, or, in this case, a multi-million-dollar hypercar. Armstrong's Chiron Purr Sport rebuild is still an ongoing story rather than a neatly wrapped-up one. At various points, his shared updates showing the car reassembled, the interior rebuilt, custom radiators fabricated to replace destroyed originals, and, after that long fight over the split chassis, the engine finally firing up again. There's still work left before the car is considered fully finished and road legal, and Armstrong has been transparent that the project has taken far longer and been far harder than he initially expected. For his part, Rimac has continued to engage with the saga rather than distance himself from it, occasionally weighing in through Bugatti's own channels or in interviews